Thank you all again for joining us. This is the National Health Council Fall International Patient Forum, an opportunity for all of those participants across the National Health Council membership, patient organizations, partner organizations, our business and industry collaborators to come together and talk about issues in a global environment that are critically important to patients, their families, and the societies in which we live. Very excited about today's program. I'm Randy Ruta, the CEO of the National Health Council, and it's the mission of the National Health Council to provide a united voice based here in the United States, but really speaking to the global patient population and their concerns on what is best for people in terms of their health and well-being and all of the different stakeholder supports around them to live with a chronic disease or condition, disabilities, their families, their caregivers, so that those individuals in the context of their lives, have the best opportunity to live independently and with health. Our goal here is to talk about what's happening in the global environment through the lens of people who are actively engaged on behalf of the National Health Council members and really all patients, their families, and caregivers globally. We recognize the international nature of healthcare, that the interests of patients and certainly of the stakeholders committed to their health do not stop at national borders. And so this is a conversation for us to really talk about what some of those issues are and how we might have greater awareness and a greater level of participation for all of our respective missions. Interestingly, although all of the National Health Council members are US-based organizations, at least 40% have missions that extend globally. And so this is, again, another reason why we are active globally, even for those organizations that have a primary focus on the United States. I understand that there's a lot of information sharing, peer support, and learning that occurs on a global basis. I'm hoping that this conversation will really advance that level of understanding and collaboration. A few housekeeping items. We are recording this session today so that it can be available for people who weren't able to join us in real time. Everyone except the speakers will be muted, but if you have any questions or comments for the panel, please raise your hand or better, put it in the chat function. What's your question, your comment? And then we will have opportunities at the end of each session or segment of our program for you to have your question come forward. I would encourage everyone to participate, share your ideas and best practices, and engage in strategic thinking. If there's a resource that you want to call attention to, put it in the chat, and that will become part of our record for this meeting. So let's take a quick look at today's program. It's a good one. We'll begin with the discussion, panel discussion on the U.S. Consensus Framework to Advance Equity and the Ethical Collaboration, where its creators will delve into key insights and discuss the framework's implications. Definitely something that you're going to want to learn more about and also kind of identify the role that you can play in building on this important work. Following this, we're going to have another dynamic panel that focuses on patient advocacy on a global stage, exploring global trends, challenges, and the evolving role of patient advocacy worldwide. And then we'll hear an important update on the Sustainable Markets Initiative from Dr. David Elvira Martinez, who has joined us previously and will give us an update on what has happened since we last spoke with him in the spring. So let's start out with this panel discussion on the U.S. framework to advance equity and ethical collaboration. Our first panel is comprised of the National Medical Association, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, also known as PhRMA, and the National Health Council, which came together in this important initiative. I'm excited to introduce our panelists, and then they will explain to you the origins of the work that they collaborated on, groundbreaking work really, and kind of what role there might be for us. So let me start by introducing the panelists themselves. Joy Calloway, Executive Director and CEO of the National Medical Association, which is an influential organization representing the interests of African American physicians and promoting health of underserved communities. Joy has an extensive background in healthcare management and policy. She brings a wealth of information and expertise forward on a variety of initiatives, all aimed at advancing health, equity, and improving health access. Joy, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
And let me also talk about Courtney Christian, Deputy Vice President of Policy and Research at Pharma, where she leads efforts to shape public policy and advance the development of innovative medicines. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
And also her colleague, Julie Wagner, who I've known for a long time and have such great respect for. That's true of really all of our panelists from my perspective. But Julie is the General Counsel for Pharma and the head of global ethics. And in this role, Julie leads Pharma's global ethics and compliance efforts, overseeing legal policies related to industry standards and regulatory matters. And Dr. Omar S. Contreras, who's part of our family here at the National Health Council, serves as Senior Vice President of Equity, Research, and Programs, where he leads initiatives aimed at advancing health equity, research, and programs focusing on improving healthcare access and outcomes for underserved communities. So thank you so much for being here today, each of you. What I'll do is start with kind of questions for each of you. And in that context, I think it'll be revealed as to why this particular framework is so incredibly important and innovative. So for Joy, the National Medical Association played a key role in founding of the U.S. Consensus Framework. Can you share a little bit of your motivations behind its formations, its membership, and that relationship between NMA, Pharma, and the NHC?
Absolutely, Randy. And thank you so much for having us and having me. And thank you to Spencer for working the logistics so that we could be here. I absolutely love telling this story about how the National Medical Association got involved. And the theme of the story is persistence. My colleague and now friend, Julie Wagner with Pharma, shortly after I joined the National Medical Association at the end of 22, began calling and emailing me about this APEC event, this APEC initiative. And she called and emailed and called and emailed. I was moving at the speed of light in a new role, and I was pretty quick to dismiss it. I kept saying Asia Pacific Economic. I'm like, what does this have to do with Black doctors in America, right? But finally, I did take her call. So glad that I did. When we finally met, as I started to learn about what she was hoping we would be able to do together, I really started to just connect the dots for the National Medical Association about where we were trying to go, expanding our footprint in this country, elevating our brand, positioning ourselves as the authority on equity in healthcare. And as we talked, all of the stars just started to align. I thought, so we'll have doctors, Black specifically doctors, we'll have patients, we'll have industry. That potential synergy started to energize me in the conversation, became really, really palpable. And I will say, and I know we'll talk more about this later, I'm still very much drawn to the real spark in this piece and very much motivated by it. And that is the concept of health equity as a matter of health ethics. And that is what makes our message unique. I don't know yet that this particular approach has been explored in a discussion of ethics, the moral principles governing behavior or doing the right thing. But the necessary extension of this conversation, which I'll focus on in a later question, really is focusing on the business imperative for equity in healthcare. So I'm really excited about that. Last couple of things I'll say. As we, the National Medical Association, National Health Council, Pharma, are serious about health equity in this country, and we have all demonstrated that we are well before this conversation came up, we need to be the ones to lead the way. Right. So there is absolutely a role for others to join us over time. We are considering and developing that now, but I'm very proud of and appreciate our really protracted thought about how to build this up. We've started small. We're being thoughtful and deliberate about growing and expanding and how we are going to curate and craft and deliver our message.
Roy, that's great. That's a wonderful and very engaging explanation of kind of what your journey was, in terms of coming into this conversation. But then also, I think others can say, wow, I could see where I could follow Joy's path and move down that, which is terrific. So let me actually get a little more information from our pharma colleagues. So Courtney, you're at pharma. I know working in the policy area, but ethics, of course, critical to our credibility as patients, patient advocates, your members, the largest really innovation companies globally that are committed to patient health and the medicines that support patient health. What was it that motivated pharma to prioritize this particular initiative?
Well, I can't take any credit for it. I would say it's all Julie. Pharma got behind a vision that Julie put forth, and my story is not as colorful as Joy's. Julie came and knocked on my door one day and said, "So I understand you're the DVP of Health Equity here at Pharma. Can you help me out? We really want to make sure that this health equity is at the center of this framework." And I said, "Sure. What can I do?" But Rainey, as you alluded to, we know, here at Pharma that the trust that, patients place in the production of the innovative treatments and cures that our industry provides, it's really bound up in a sort of shared understanding that industry approaches that this sort of endeavor with a commitment to business ethics and compliance at the center of that process. And so, as pharma, we have sort of a code of ethics that Julie knows way more about than I do, but it's really centered around our relationships with healthcare professionals, a set of principles that guide that, a set of principles that promote sharing of truthful and non-misleading information, and then a set of principles around clinical trial diversity, which is also part and parcel of what we're doing here with this framework. One thing that I want to kind of perk your listeners' attention with is this quote that one of my mentors shared with me, and that is that health is a crown that the healthy wear, but only the sick can see. And so I think in the context of what we're talking about here in terms of business ethics being at the center of healthcare, is whether or not somebody has that crown of health, right? You define health equity one way, Joy, you define health equity another way, but I think we all agree that it comes down to whether or not a person has the ability to experience optimal health through equitable access to providers and to care. And so here at Pharma, particularly, we are thinking about that through the lens of social and structural drivers of health, where we live, where we work, where we play, where we pray, and other kind of factors once patients enter the healthcare system to that affect their access to care. And so I think you'll find, and I'm sure Omar will talk about this a little bit more when we think about the principles within our framework around a patient-centered approach, ethical research and innovation, being accountable and transparent, and having independent and ethical conduct with healthcare professionals is really just at the root of why Pharma is part of this. Also with Julie's amazing guidance, pushing folks in the building here to make us pay attention.
Well, that's really well said, Courtney, and thank you for sharing that quote. I see in the chat, Amanda flagged it as saying, very well said, and I completely agree with her. But it really is, this conversation is really a nexus between, equity and eliminating disparities, ethics, and how all of these issues are balanced within the healthcare environment. Which is one of the things I thought made this initiative so fascinating. The fact that the U.S. delegation could bring the concept of equity forward and contribute that in this international conversation and what that means globally, because it means a lot, different things in different places, just was very powerful for me. So, and Omar, I know you represented the National Health Council in this conversation, which I thought was very, very appropriate given your passion for equity. Talk a little bit about how this partnership aligns with the NHC mission and what opportunities you feel that this conversation creates, the specific action creates for patient-centered impact.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Randy. And I think for all of us and for audience who are probably joining us from different parts of the world as well, I think it's important to, really reinforce that our mission at the National Health Council is to elevate the voice of patients with chronic disease and disabilities. And as you mentioned earlier in your opening remarks, we do have representation from patient organizations who have that global presence, but also just to, further detailed those numbers is that 43% of our membership are patient organizations, 27% of those are partners of patient organizations, and about 30% are members of industry. So I think here with this partnership that we were able to come together with the National Medical Association and pharma, really just bring fruition to our passion for health equity. Health equity at the National Health Council is rooted within the work that we do, is rooted in our strategic plan, and it's also going to continue into the next set of a strategic plan. So what we've done in the past is that we ensure that patients understand their rights through participation of equitable research, and we do that through the development of evidence-based tools that help us to move forward the needle in health equity by ensuring that we are transparent with our process, that we're compensating patients according to our fair market value calculator that was developed, again, with input from patients and patient organizations. And we also ensure that that our work is equitable, that is access, that is affordability, and that we do address those social drivers of health. And maybe Julie will dive a little bit into this as well in her remarks, is that the consensus framework on health equity has 4 different principles. You know, what's so many of those are about patient centricity, making sure that the patient is at the center. And when I say that, again, I had a colleague who said, it's not about throwing everything at the patient in the middle, but ensuring that the patient centricity is the ultimate goal that we want to achieve in all of these activities. Ensuring that patients are at the center so that we could remove barriers, eliminate systemic and oppression barriers that still exist. Again, making sure that we are transparent with our efforts, but also how do we go about elevating the principles that patients are part of it all the way through. And so again, Randy, I think, you know, having this opportunity to unveil the U.S. Consensus Framework on Health Equity specifically, being the first in the global stage to bring health equity forward is very impressive. And I think it's also commendable because we're moving into a stage that it's unknown, but I think we must continue the fight, and having that ability to work continental, but also within our own individual organizations and partners is very unique to the work that we do here at the NHC. And just so to finalize on this point is that we have a rule here at NHC that all the work that we do for patients with patients, and that any advisory group or committee is comprised of 50% of patients. And that just, again, that reinforces our absolute commitment to patient centricity and those patient-centered outcomes.
Omar, that's great. Thanks for really drawing that direct connection to how meaningful this conversation, this activity is to really how we approach all of the work, the advocacy, the policy work that we seek to do. Well, I think a common denominator hearing with our speakers so far is that, well, Julie called, and that was certainly my reaction. You know, I've had the opportunity over the years to work with Julie, and she really is second to none in terms of her expertise around ethics and how that speaks to the collaborative nature of the work that we do. And it's just so strengthening across the board. So when Julie called and said, would you have an interest in participating in this? And then started to explain where it was coming from, I thought, this is very different from something that we may have been doing before. But Julie, I'll ask you to give us a sense of this U.S. consensus framework. So we're the 14th country worldwide to implement this framework. So that's really precedent setting. And can you talk a little bit about how this framework from the U.S. then differs from other consensus frameworks? And then specifically, and I think this will be of interest to our audience, that this was coming through a collaboration with the Department of Commerce. And I know certainly pharma and its members are very engaged in all the business community conversations that occur, Department of Commerce as well. I think for the patient community, this might have opened some new doors and new perspectives for us, and I really thank you for that. So just give us a little background on what this is and really how important it is for us all.
Thank you, and thank you all for the kind words. It's such a treat to hear those from friends, but this is a collaboration, and absolutely not possible without you, Randy and Joy and Courtney, and Omar. Randy, and you were involved in some of the very earliest conversations about this too, and I do think it really it is a very unique and very special platform, and I think that is really sort of what has driven this to become something so unique and special in the United States too. So you mentioned it arises in connection with the Department of Commerce, and Joy mentioned it arises in the context of APEC, which is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperative. So this is a sort of business related, commerce related, public-private partnership that goes all the way up to the heads of state level. So President Biden was in Peru just a few weeks ago, meeting with the other heads of state on all kinds of issues related to commerce. And then there are industry-specific work streams that flow down out of that. And so there's one related to healthcare ethics, and this arises in the context of that work stream. And so you are also correct that the United States was not the first to have a consensus framework. We are the 14th. And the reason for that is because most of the consensus frameworks, which are partnerships between physicians and patients and industry across the globe, focus pretty heavily on anti-corruption. So I can give one example. The group of us, we were in Peru to officially announce the launch of the consensus framework, and our colleagues in Peru relayed a story in which the corruption was so endemic, and there was some alleged corrupt behavior happening behind the scenes, wherein a certain ventilator manufacturer was providing payments to the Peruvian government, such that the standards for ventilators during COVID-19 were set so high that only one manufacturer could meet them. That manufacturer, unfortunately, couldn't meet the demand, and so there was an extraordinary lack of ventilators in Peru, which led to Peru having the highest per capita death rate from COVID-19. And so this is an example of the sort of just endemic corruption that a lot of the countries in the Asia Pacific region deal with. And so that's not the case in the US. We don't have that sort of endemic corruption. And so for a lot of years it was felt that maybe the United States didn't need a consensus framework. But in sitting in those meetings and in seeing the incredible impact that these partnerships were having, right? When providers and industry and patients align on something, they can have an extraordinary impact in their country. In those cases, in sort of fighting corruption. And I'm sort of sitting there thinking like, okay, maybe corruption isn't endemic, but we do have our own problems, right? Like we do have endemic issues. And equity is the one, that's right at the forefront. And sort of Courtney is our superstar expert on that. And she could spout off all of the, statistics about, sort of differences in life expectancy just between, for example, wards in the District of Columbia where we all live. And so it's just that is our endemic problem, or at least that is one of them, right? Where we all were aligned, and it just became obvious really quickly that was something that we could and should leverage this platform to, sort of work on. And so the United States is the first to have equity as part of their framework, and we're very proud of that. And my three colleagues, Joy and Courtney and Omar, presented on equity in Peru at the meeting, the APEC meeting in September. And it was just an extraordinary conversation. I've never heard equity come up in those conversations of ethics or of, they tend to be more compliance with laws. And it was just extraordinary to hear the response, from other countries. It was very clear that these three folks on the line are truly thought leaders in this area of equity and had, just so much to share with our colleagues in other countries. And so it's been a really exciting and very special experience.
Well, Julie, I just love the way you presented on that. So something like this, and I know when we first spoke in the international room, I thought, well, is this something that's just symbolic? Is this one of those things that it's an interesting conversation that never really quite penetrates to the behaviors of the way all the different stakeholders, engage with each other, or leads, better yet, to that patient outcome that we would all be looking for? And just in hearing your explanation now and just kind of witnessing how this unfolded, it's anything but symbolic. And I know the ideas that came forward from you all in Peru, I believe, were really highly of great interest. They were taken up by all the different stakeholders that are there. And I know as I look at the participants that we have today across our patient members and provider members, really all of our members, we are actively involved with the business community, with policymakers in the public sector. And there's instruction here for us. This could well open doors that we can then pursue that really take our entire agenda forward with at its core equity, which makes such sense. Well, let me ask you, Joy, then, as we think about that, so what makes this conversation, this collaboration, kind of the right place to be, the right time for, and the relevance of this conversation today, in your mind?
So I always think long and hard about how best to answer this question. I have three-ish thoughts on it that may or may not feel well threaded together, but I believe all sage. So thought one, I would say at a time when we have more data, more evidence-based research speaking to the importance of Black physicians in a community, in research rooms and exam rooms, what their presence and their practice means to the health outcome of that community. At a time where we have data and scientifically sound evidence on the positive health outcomes of racially concordant care, at a time when we know that Black physicians are more likely to positively impact the health outcomes of Black patients, who we know have disproportionately more severe rates of disease and disability. In this moment, with all of this evidence, we are facing a voracious and I'd say eerily historically familiar attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. There is a resurgence of anti-Blackness, a rearing of the head of anti-othering that is happening socio-politically. I would say that the powers that be, newly emboldened, are doing everything possible to reverse or dial back any gains that we've made toward equity, or to otherwise characterize those gains as reverse racism without comprehension of what racism really actually is. So that's my first thought. My second thought, and bear with me on this one too, I'm a preacher's kid, so this is what comes to mind. What kept coming to me as I was considering on NMA's behalf being part of this work, and now as I reflect on the timing, is a scripture that I learned as a kid. It says, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home." So for me, there's something very timely about us having a global conversation about health equity as a matter of health ethics because of where we are socio-politically in our own country, right? So this is urgent, this conversation, and relevant because it elevates and it globalizes this discussion that is being so fiercely attacked and vilified here in our own country. Right. So the Dr. King's fierce urgency of now really resonates as I think about answering this question. He delivered that here in Washington more decades than I've been alive. And here we go again, or we're back here, depending on your perspective of the progress we've made. My third thought, and I'll close with this, is as excited as I am about this work, in, again, this current climate, I am not, I'm being cautiously optimistic about having that same level of excitement in the marketplace, right? That threading together of equity and ethics, equity, the quality of being fair and just, doing the right thing, and ethics, the moral principles that guide our behavior, threading those two things together. I fear that we may be more excited about that than the industry may be. So I'm hopeful that we'll see something different. This is Joy talking here, who happens to be the executive director and CEO of a nonpartisan organization. This extension of the conversation, though, or the extension of the conversation that says we must focus on the business imperatives, connecting the fiscal bottom line to equity and ethics, is most likely the pathway. I don't expect us to change people's moral thermometers, right? I'm hopeful, but I believe that the current powers that be want to hear the business bottom line. So that is where I think the extension of this work is. So hopefully I've answered that urgency and relevancy, and also given us a little fodder for how we get to the next step.
Absolutely, you have, and you really bring that sense of passion, that sense of now, but also the recognition that this is a conversation that we typically try to have together and have had the most success in having together. And this is where I really applaud our pharma colleagues. I applaud really all segments of our stakeholder community, because when you put patients' interests front and center, it really helps then get a perspective on how we can move forward as a society, as businesses with business models they must pursue, but with that focus on patients and patient outcomes, which is so critical. Well, Courtney, let me ask you this then. So as we listen to Joy and your colleagues' comments, as we think about the experience we've had in this space, what would be your vision for the future for this particular U.S. consensus framework?
I want to add on to one of Joy's quotes that became one of my favorite ones, particularly during the pandemic. And it's, I'm paraphrasing Dr. King, but he said, what affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. And so I think that our framework is a way to kind of center that, right? For organizations looking to center ethical action at the heart of their health equity work, we can keep that sort of quote in mind. And also when we're thinking about it from a business perspective, we know that health inequities are projected to cost the United States $1.1 trillion by 2040. And so what are each one of us doing, bringing our resources to bear to bring that cost down, to ensure that there's parity? So it doesn't matter whether you live where I'm here in DC, if you're east of the river in Ward 8, or you live far upper Northwest, your access to care is on the same level, has the same level of parity. No matter where you live, zip code should not be a predictor of your health outcomes. And so I think as we, continue to grow, we just established the written framework in April and launched it. And certainly in, I think it was September, time flies, when we were all in Peru presenting this, like we want to think about responsibly advancing this framework, bringing in other partners who care about health equity and see it in the same sort of business ethics sort of framework that we do, but are also willing to put their resources and their time into doing something that will help patients, over the course of their lives.
Absolutely. Well, I think that really kind of talks about how there's a synergy here across our goals, as well as the conversations, the relationships, and what we're looking to advance. Because, we could be coming at some of these very same issues from different perspectives, talking about value, talking about efficiency, talking about workforce, and they all kind of come back to really what you're calling out, Courtney. Omar, why don't I ask you to just comment very quickly, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if any of you have comments or questions that are online, please put them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and take a few minutes for those comments and questions. But Omar, as you think about where we go from here, this partnership that each of your colleagues are describing, and I know you described to me, what actions are needed by us as collectively to sustain the momentum? And then really, how does that particularly relate to our patient-centric focus?
Sure. Thanks, Randy. As you can see, my colleagues and their energy is so infectious that you just want to continue working on this important work that we've done here with the U.S. Consensus Framework on health equity. And our goal as we continue implementing these principles outlined on the U.S. Consensus Framework on health equity is to continue raising awareness, really ensuring that we put health equity at the forefront, whether it is by diversifying the workforce, such as the work that NMA is doing, diversity in clinical trials, which is really pharma has been great leaders, or is it also centering patients at the work that we do across different levels of the healthcare ecosystem at the NHC. So Randy, I think I welcome all of our audience here and our global partners to help us identify what are those synergies that we could bring forward this consensus framework. How can we elevate it? And as we, this core group continues to move forward, we want to make sure that we listen to you. How do we best, again, put into action this core set of principles that allows you to move the work forward? And also, I wanted to add to some of Julie's point earlier is that when we were in Peru, and others had developed those frameworks, specifically on anti-corruption and legal compliance, is that we gave something to them to offer in terms of health equity. And now they are looking at health equity from their own lens and how they could embed that within their own consensus framework. So again, I think all of us need to really, my call to action is to help us, raise awareness, bring us to your platforms. How do we elevate that there is already a tangible document and framework that allows us to move the needle forward on health equity. And what better way to do it than with my colleagues here today? So I'm just in awe of their work, their diligence, and I'm just blessed to keep learning from all of them and moving the fight forward on achieving health equity.
Thank you, Omar. I think that's really that's so who you are and so what you bring forward. I think so many of all of us that are on the call today really share that vision, that desire. I would ask, and Spencer, you'll have to tell me if anyone has their hands raised. I'm looking in the chat. I'm not seeing any questions popping up right now, so please do participate. We have a few minutes. Spencer, anyone have their hands raised that I'm not seeing?
I'm not seeing anybody at the moment,
Okay.
but if you're shy, don't be. Just raise it up and we'll get
That's
right to
right.
you.
Well, and know that we'll also, if you do have some comments or questions at any point, those, we'll bring back to our panelists and certainly share in the documentation. One of the things that strikes me, and maybe I could invite, those of you that are on the panel to just respond, is what Omar just mentioned. I guess we were very honest in saying to the global community through this consensus framework, the United States is still very much working on this. This is a work in progress, right? And I would have to think that there was some receptivity to that because it wasn't the US stepping in and saying, well, we have it all figured out and here's how you should pursue equity and in the context of ethics and business and patients together. But I would have to think as different countries thought about their indigenous populations, maybe they've got challenges around equity for people who are refugees or newcomers to their country. Just comment briefly, and I'm not seeing any other questions, just comment briefly on just that sense of we're kind of co-creating these solutions. Anybody want to jump in on that? Because that's my sense.
We did see that, as Julie mentioned, we had quite a positive reception to our conversation. And we did, we were very candid, Joy and I, for sure, about sort of the historical mistrust that a lot of communities of color have in the healthcare system in the United States, and why health equity is so important. It continues to be something that we work towards because there's so much rooted in the origin of the nation that has driven healthcare outcomes generationally to be what they are. And we got a lot of conversation from folks, I think it was New Zealand and a couple of other countries that said, we have sort of similar issues with the indigenous population in our country, where we're sort of having to reckon with, our treatment of certain populations and thinking about how we are more equitable in our healthcare access and practices with those populations. Like, how do we make sure that everybody, no matter where they come from, has access to the care that they need? And so that really has set off, I think, a chain of conversations with us while we were there with other countries that prompted them to think in similar veins about maybe Native populations they have within their countries that may have been affected by certain practices or other historical issues within their countries. That United States is, I think sometimes we position ourselves a little bit as the shining city on a hill, but sometimes there are some not so shiny things happening. And I think we're being very honest within this framework to say we've had some not so shiny things happen, but we're working to address them.
Kind of goes back, if I may add, Randy, it goes back to the earlier conversation about the timing of this conversation. So here we are, in South America, and folks are coming up to us, just amazed at us having this conversation. And in many ways, it was an easier conversation to have there than it might be here. Right. And so, the willingness to listen, the willingness to ask questions, to seek to understand, to offer thoughts was very it was surprising at first to me, but then very refreshing, because I thought this is the environment in which we can have a real conversation and we can really start looking at and leaning into what solutions may look like. The other thing I'll say, and then see the floor, is I was really bugged as I was learning about this. I was really bugged that we were like 14th to jump in. I'm like, what? We're the United States of America. What are you talking about? But all the timing of this, I think now that as I'm continuing to learn, I don't know that it could have been better, right? Because we needed not to show up kicking the door in with our USA chant, right? We needed to come in differently and listen for whatever reason we did. Because surely we didn't do it with that amount of thought, but it really made sense that we sat back and allowed others to play the lead while we
Mhm.
learned and listened and then came to the table. I believe that is serving us very well.
Well, I really appreciate that. I mean, there's the right time, the right place, these things happen. And I would look to Julie, who really had a sense of that as this opportunity came forward. And Julie, we're going to go to the next session, but just one last word from you, if you'd like.
Thank you. I would just echo what everyone said on the panel, and in particular, the last point that Joy just made. I think it provides us with a nice opportunity to have a conversation that goes both ways, right? We're learning from other consensus frameworks about how to be a consensus framework and what's been successful for them. And then we're also sharing, sort of what we're doing on equity, which is maybe new and different from what they're doing. So it does provide this really nice sort of mutual basis for conversation and for relationship building. So I'm really grateful to be a part of this and excited about where we might go next.
Well, thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Joy and Courtney, Julie, Omar. This is really so informative and inspiring. And to Courtney's point, maybe in the past where we haven't felt we shined, we have an opportunity to shine now. And I think what does happen so often, even as we might be pursuing our focus or more focus on a domestic agenda, healthcare, the needs of patients, the voice of patients, the learning from patients is indeed global. And this hopefully opens another door for us to have that perspective and move forward together. And I couldn't thank you all enough. So let's just plan on revisiting our progress in this space going forward. And I think as we move into the next part of this program, you'll see how all of these issues are really interrelated. Why? Because we're talking about patients and their health in all of the different contexts that we represent. So thank you all for leading this panel with me. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much, Randy.
so
Thank
much.
you.
So now we'll shift gears a little bit, although you're going to see some interconnectivity here. Our next panel has been asked to talk about patient advocacy on a global stage. And as I reached out to our panelists, I was like, with such great respect and appreciation, it's like, come share with us whatever you want to talk about, because I know that it's going to be highly relevant to all of those that are participating today. And we've got a great turnout among our National Health Council membership. But I have got the pleasure of introducing Leanne West, who will serve as the moderator for this panel, as well as contributing her own personal perspectives on global health, which I greatly appreciate. Leanne is the president of International Children's Advisory Network, or ICANN, as well as the chief engineer for pediatric technology at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And with over 25 years of experience at Georgia Tech, she's led multi-million-dollar programs, developed products for government and industry partners. She truly is a leader in helping us understand how all of the different aspects of innovation and health can move forward on truly a global stage. ICON advocates for the inclusion of pediatric patients and caregiver voices in healthcare, clinical trials, research, really connecting members of organizations internationally on the issues that I think can so uniquely be represented in the experience of your young constituents, their parents, families, and others. So with that, Leanne, let me let you welcome our panelists, welcome all of those that are participating in today's call. I'm so appreciative of you taking time to be with us here today.
So thank you so much, Randy. It is great to be here, and I want to welcome everyone to this session. We are going to be diving into a discussion on how patient organizations are navigating the landscape of international patient advocacy. There's a growing importance of patient advocacy in global health policies, and patient organizations have the opportunity to really play a role in patient outcomes across borders. So at ICANN, as Randy mentioned, we put families and children from 40 different countries around the world together with industry and researchers through webinars and surveys and focus groups, as well as an in-person annual summit, to make sure that youth voices are heard and integrated into everything that's happening in healthcare. And globally, we know that patients are really not all at the same place. Here in the US, we're looking at taking technology and healthcare into the home. And for some of the groups we work with in Africa, they're really just looking for some basic healthcare at all. And so it can really be different everywhere. I think with patient advocacy, we've seen that having access to the internet can really help those patients spread their voices and what it's like to be them. And I think that that's super helpful. Of course, I'm coming at this from a technology side of things from my day job. But what we want to do is we feel that, collaboration really with all different patient organizations is the key to making this all happen and to move forward the voice of patients everywhere most effectively. So along those lines, I have a great panel for us to talk to. We have Jennifer Bright, who is the president and CEO of the International Consortium for Health Outcome Measurements, or ICHOM. Amanda Bach, Chief Partnership Officer for the Synergist, and we work closely with them. Rebecca Vermeulen, from VP of Global Patient Networks and Product Development Medical Affairs at Roche. And Clarissa Kuhlball, who is the Director of Patient Initiatives at the International Society for Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research, or ISPOR. So I want to welcome all of you all today, and I'm going to be throwing questions out to each of you, but what I would love is if there's something that you want to comment on, please feel free to jump in. But to begin with, let me ask all of you a quick question. How do you define global patient advocacy in your respective roles? What does it mean in terms of improving patient outcomes worldwide? So let's start with Jennifer.
Sure. Well, first, let me just observe that we're all ending a year, and sometimes you end the year and you feel exhausted because you just feel like you've been pushing boulders uphill. It's a delight to be able to end the year with a panel like this, because it's so cool to listen to what other people are working on and how truly, if you zipped all of our work together, look at the amazing force for good that all of our organizations. So it's helping me end on an uplifted note. So thank you to Randy and everybody for that. When I thought about this global patient advocacy, how do I define it? Some of the themes that have come up already in the prior panel, when I started in patient advocacy way too many years that I would rather admit ago, we didn't have nearly the technology that we have now that you just referred to, Leanne. We didn't have a sense of global community. And now wherever I go, what I hear and what I feel is the enormous power of patient voice that has truly been enabled by technology, but also as we build our own networks through our own work or as individuals, we're all realizing that no matter where we are in the world, we have a lot of common experience that ties us together. And for me, the way that has nexus with ICHOM is it's about the outcomes. We all have a desire to have similar outcomes, regardless of our socioeconomic background, what kind of policy or financing system our healthcare is in, wherever we sit in the world. If you're a pregnant mother or person giving birth, you want to have the same outcomes. If you have a cancer diagnosis, you want to have the same outcomes. Now, whether you can get those outcomes is a different answer, but it's the common North Star, if you will, which is the aspirational. And I also think that it is the common definition of what equity really looks like. It's the opportunity for any person to have their ultimate opportunity at health and well-being. And we define that by outcomes. So top line, my definition is we're here. We are a global community of common desire for health and well-being. And we are an empowered global community, one that I think is at a tipping point of really taking over as a power voice in the conversation.
Absolutely. Amanda, do you want to go next?
I really don't want to go next. I don't want to follow Jennifer. Well, that was, but I will go next. I'll jump in and I'll take the going next for the team. I fully agree with everything that Jennifer has said. I will add that it's a pleasure to end the year with all of you, many of who are very close friends and colleagues, and with whom we've built so much trust and such meaningful work already. So it's not platitudes when we say that if we can see the impact of the collective work that we do, because we really can see the impact. To answer your question, it's interesting. I struggle to answer it because I think that every patient advocate is on a different path, and we're talking about a global landscape here. But if I had to summarize it, I would say in the many, many years that I myself was a patient advocate, I think we've seen progression from what we could say was activism to what we could say was human rights-based advocacy, to what we could say was data-driven, economic-based access advocacy. And where I see us going today, and part of what we're going to discuss in this panel, is a partnership-based advocacy, which will hopefully be the last station on that journey. Because when we bring the patient's lived experience into partnership with health decision-making at all levels of the health system, that should be the patient need integrated everywhere it needs to be integrated, the way that it needs to be integrated, when it needs to be integrated directly from the source. So hopefully that's where we're going to go in 2025 and beyond.
Yes, that's fabulous, and I agree. Rebecca?
I just want to say exactly what they've said, right? I think what is highlighted through this conversation is, spot on definition, Jennifer, of, everybody should have the opportunity for access to health, right? That is really the mutual goal that we're all striving for. And the only way you can do that is by what Amanda said. You have to be able to integrate the patient voice and patient perspectives in co-creation to make that happen. And so, our perspective and our commitments are very much on how do we create mutual value as a trusted partner in this space so that we can support patient communities to elevate their voice. First and foremost, aligned around patient outcomes, understanding what good patient outcomes look like, and how do we ensure that we are contributing to equitable outcomes. So health equity is a huge part of our commitment to doing that. And how do we partner and collaborate so that healthcare systems and the policies that are framing those health systems can support patients and understand their need. And so we do a lot of work with patient communities so that they can elevate their voices as a part of that conversation.
Yes. Clarissa?
Great. I'm glad I get the to bring up the rear on this one. Well, just honestly, a real big thank you to NHC and to the rest of my panelists, of course. I think this is such a great opportunity for all of our organizations to just be on the same stage to talk about things that we probably already know. But just sharing the information that we have to others, I think, is just such a valuable treat or gift at the end of the year. So thank you so much. I think personally, I think global patient advocacy can be defined probably how the rest of the panelists have described it very beautifully already. And even the panelists before, looking at empowerment, equity, collaboration, just using all of those resources that other communities are focusing on. I think oftentimes it's, well, we're focusing on this, or we have this resource and we have this framework. I think looking at what your strengths are as an organization and pulling those together for the patients and the general public at that really pulls it all together, because we can't do it all alone, to be honest. we did work on a definition for patient engagement at ISPOR, and we had that definition vetted over 400 members globally. So just to give you an idea of how that can be used, you know, patient engagement and patient-centeredness are often used interchangeably, I think, and we did some great work on looking at over 1,800 definitions and trying to come to a consensus definition that would resonate, honestly, globally across the globe. To what does that mean to patients and how they can actively measure it across their organization. So I think doing more work like that, collaborative research is definitely helpful. So back
Yes.
over to you, Leah.
Yes, and I think, you know, like you said, you polled 400 members. I mean, getting everybody on the same page and speaking the same language is so very important. Because that's the only way to really be able to move forward, is if everybody understands what you're talking about. So, Jennifer, I'm going to start with you, but again, everybody feel free to jump in if you want to add something. But ICHOM is at the forefront of defining patient-centered health outcomes. Can you share how ICHOM's approach contributes to a global advocacy for patient-centered care?
Sure. So for those of you that don't know ICHOM, I will give you the 20-second version. We are as Randy said, a US-based nonprofit founded 14 years ago by Michael Porter, who was at Harvard Business School, and 2 clinicians from Europe who had spent a lot of time talking about this concept of value and saying we really need to focus on the patient and family experience and the outcomes that are most important to them. How do we operationalize this concept and take it outside the bounds of an academic enterprise? And so ICHOM was born. And the organization mission and vision is that we will achieve better health and well-being if we focus on a standardized set of way of measuring the outcomes that are most important to patients. And so what we've produced alongside patients as well as clinical and research experts, that they make up working groups. And we have produced 46 different roadmaps, essentially, that say, here are the dimensions of care and outcomes that are most important to patients living with diabetes, with coronary artery disease, with obesity. And then once we've defined those dimensions, what are the best-in-class clinical and patient-reported outcome measures that currently exist and are in use in research and clinical practice to measure those dimensions. And we make those resources freely available. So one of the things that I've only been at the head of this organization for about 1.5 years. But one of the things we've been doing is beyond the patient and family members that we engage with in the working groups, we've been trying to expand our interaction with patient organizations all over the globe to let them know that these resources exist, to make sure that they understand that all of these are co-created with patient communities, and then we reimburse the patients for that. We've done that before it was even in vogue to do it. And we also co-author. So all of the patients who contribute to the working groups are also listed on a peer-reviewed published journal article that embeds the science of these resources. And then since I joined, so we created a patient partner alliance to try to expand the awareness of these resources, but also to engage patient communities in helping us see what's the next iteration of these resources. They're very valuable and used in clinical environments all over the globe. They're being looked at by national health systems to embed as their data backbone. They're being used as part of accreditation standards for hospitals. So there's really a lot of application of this work that we do. But one of the things that we've heard back from some of our patient colleagues is that some of the materials could be very used as shared decision-making tools or resources for patients who are going into a clinical conversation, and they have resources that they can say, well, we've talked about these 3 dimensions of my clinical experience, but we haven't talked about any of the other things, quality of life related things. So this is an example of forward looking. we will learn from patient communities what they need in order to get the best out of the healthcare system. And that's something that I'm very interested in ICHOM pursuing as we go forward, so that even as we're advocating for clinical and governments to embed this work in what they're, embed these resources in what they're doing to collect the actual data, we're also looking at how can this help individuals right now who are encountering conversations and have an opportunity to set their care pathway on the right, in the right direction right out of the gate. So happy to answer questions, but this is something that is very much embedded in the mission and the culture of the organization, which I'm really pleased to share that with you. And I'm looking forward to hearing what some of the other organizations are also doing and how can we work together.
Wonderful. It's amazing the number of resources you all have been able to put together, and that's got to be so helpful to the healthcare community. So kudos for that, for sure. Amanda, as part of the Synergist and the Global Patient Movement Catalyst, your work on building partnerships to create patient-centered ecosystems. Can you, so you work on those. So can you tell us what the Global Patient Movement is and explain how it approaches patient advocacy on a global scale?
Yes. Yes, that's my aspiration more than I would say that it's my work. But for those of you, maybe I should learn from Jennifer and start with what the Synergist is. For those of you who don't know what the Synergist is, we're a nonprofit based in Brussels, but working globally. And our role is to be the backbone of multi-sector and multi-stakeholder collaborations on societal challenges. So we have many programs that we host and that we help to bring forward in collaborative ways, some of which you may be familiar with. PFMD, I see some members here. FD3, there are other members perhaps with us now. And so the way that we work is we incubate an idea and we work collaboratively across stakeholder groups to bring it to maturity and to find its funding mechanism and then to roll it out into the world. And so the Patient Movement Catalyst is still in incubation. It is being seed funded from our own reserve at the moment. And the way that I would describe it is that it's a motivation driven and vision-based coalition of the willing globally. So these are people that are patient representatives, people with lived experience, or patient engagement champions, working together over 3 years now to co-create what we think is needed to help patients bring their voice better. And I will say, and I'll just plug briefly that because we're not an official program, we don't have an official board, but we do have a council of stewards. And Randy is on our steward council, as is Danny Motzi, who I think has spoken to you 6 months ago. She's the CEO of IAPO. So as you can see, we are co-shaping with capable, competent hands. And so what I will say, the Global Patient Movement Catalyst, what it seeks to do really is to synergize and bridge between the efforts of patient communities globally, so across geographies and across disease areas. And the way that we want to do that is working from the bottom up. So over 3 years, we've had many conversations with many patient leaders, and by far not all yet. So if you're on this call and I haven't spoken to you yet, please come find me or let me know where I can find you, because I'd love to have that conversation. The conversations that we've had so far have led to the identification of 3 pillars that we collectively need to address if we want to get the patient voice officially and formally embedded in decision making. And those pillars won't be terribly new to you. One of them is positioning, so having the formal and official role of patient voices in the decision making architecture, and that can be all the way from macro policy level to down to the delivery of treatment and care in your local clinic. So that's the positioning pillar. The second one is the capability building to be able to ensure to health systems that those patient representatives have the capacities that they need to be sustainable long-term partners in decision-making. And of course, the third pillar is the sustainable and diversified sources of funding to enable the first 2. And so that is what we've been working on at the Global Patient Movement Catalyst. And without getting too far ahead of myself, I will say that one of the most exciting turns of events, and the previous panel spoke a lot about the serendipity of the now. One of the most exciting turns of event for us was that there was an adjacent movement at global level in the World Health Organization that led to the adoption, the unanimous adoption, by the way, of the World Health Assembly resolution on social participation in health last spring. And that's something that I would love to talk to your audience about more, because for me, what Joy so wonderfully quoted Dr. Luther saying, Dr. Martin Luther King saying, as the fierce urgency of now. For me, the fierce urgency of now is to seize the opportunity of this resolution and not to let it go.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes. Yeah, that's all great. Rebecca, gonna move to you now. So in your role at Roche, you lead efforts to bring patients into the development process. So how does Roche ensure that the voices of patients worldwide are incorporated into the design and delivery of medical products?
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge, the work we do at Roche, is really truly bringing patient perspective into our research programs. My official title is Global Patient Network Lead within the company. It is a network. So that is a very purposeful statement in that in order for us to do our work well, we have to work from global to local very closely with our colleagues in country to make sure we're bringing the right patient perspectives to the table. As I said earlier, our commitment around health equity is a core focus area, and that means that inclusive research as a tenet within that strategy is essential. So partnering to really understand patient populations and needs and where there are differences in our product portfolio of treatments to ensure that we're tapping into those communities from a diversity and inclusion standpoint is really critical for us. And so that takes us working very closely with our research partners. We engage very, very early on in the development life cycle at the time that our treatments are going into humans to make sure there's a grounded understanding of the patient perspective. And then as those programs progress through the product development life cycle, that there's regular engagement with patient communities and diverse patient councils and diverse input through the programs that we're doing in order to deliver on that. And so I would just say it takes a village, and we are very committed, right, to being the initiators of bringing those communities together to be truly inclusive and hold ourselves true to a co-creation model. Nothing about us without us, right? Continues to be a mantra that we live by within our team.
Yes, wonderful. I completely agree that it is that network. I applaud you all for making sure the patient is included throughout the process. So that's great. And it does take a village for sure. All right. So Clarissa, I'm going to go to you next. ISPOR is committed to advancing scientific research with a focus on patient-centered outcomes. How does ISPOR's work influence global patient advocacy through health economics and outcomes research?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with what is ISPOR, because I'm not sure it's familiar to everyone on this call anyway. So I thank you for the introduction before, but the Professional Society for Health Economics and Outcomes Research. We are an international society, nonprofit, founded in 1995, with multi-stakeholders as well, including researchers, academicians, assessors, regulators, payers, policymakers, life sciences, healthcare providers, and of course, the patient engagement organizations that we work with. I think with a society with a membership of over 19,000 individual and chapter members from, I would say, over 110 countries, it's a bold vision that we have, I believe. We just revamped our vision statement as well as our strategic plan 2030. The new vision statement for ISPOR is a world where healthcare is accessible, effective, efficient, and affordable for all. So as I said, it's a bold statement. But we intend to deliver on that, obviously, with our members using database research, evidence-based decision-making. Our hope is that all of that leads to better health outcomes, better treatment protocols, and better outcomes for patients. So obviously that's a big goal for us. As we take on that goal, we are going to be focusing on whole health, which is a new term for us. And we're looking at different ways to include different patient organizations. Over the years, we've had, since 2013, as far back as I can remember, patient roundtables that span the globe in North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, Latin America. We've worked with over 200 patient representatives on various different topics, because as a theme is coming out here, it's about the regions, it's about the timing of these topics that are important. It's dynamic, I will say. You know, patient engagement is not like a static thing that you can just say, oh, we did the definition, we did the paper, it's done. I will say that it changes with time. We saw that with the pandemic. We're seeing different equity conversations coming up. So I think that's important, to stay in the know, to stay dynamic, and talk to your patient councils, if you will, if you don't have the boards and all of that. They're the ones that can direct you to what are the hot topics, what are the areas for resources that need to be developed. Because evidently, I think we're all working to improve the outcomes of patients, and that's what matters, is to engage with them and see what is useful for them. I think further to that, we just launched our HEOR Explained. You might hear HEOR, and what is that? That's another acronym. It's Health Economics and Outcomes Research. So very complex topics, I will say. A lot of different stakeholders involved in those topics. So we developed a webpage. It's very brand new. I think it launched last week. Just trying to get to the lay public on what do we mean by health economics and outcomes research. What are the different methods and models and different considerations that need to be looked at when talking to different stakeholders. So I encourage everyone to check that out if you can. But yeah, I think there's just a lot going on, but I think as simple as we can. I know there's a lot with our digital. I think we'll probably touch on this digital and AI related work. Everyone's looking for those shorter bits of information. How does it resonate to me? I think that's a new direction for us. And obviously with our patients involved in that, you want to make your information communicable to all the patients globally. We have a couple projects that are up and coming. Just most recently, we're looking at the measurement, I touched on this earlier, measurement of quality patient engagement. We just published an article from our patient-centered special interest group, looking at the ISPOR community. What are the gaps for health economics and outcomes researchers when talking to patients, when looking at their different research projects? As you may know, ISPOR has 2 big conferences a year. Those are in North America and Europe. We just finished up one that had over 6,400 attendees. So in that submission protocol, what does it look like when you're saying that you're doing patient-centered research? Did you really engage with the patients start to finish? So that is one thing that is very brand new, that we've implemented in that conference submission system, is checking that. Did you engage with patients? Did you follow this definition? So I think with going back to being dynamic and looking at the timing, the region, the disease areas, getting to know your audience too. I think that's really important, because we started somewhere, but we've definitely evolved along the way. So stop there.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. And that's amazing that you have so many participants in your events. How wonderful that is, to see how important it is to so many people. So, yeah, I just want to kind of recap a little bit some of the key things that I think were said. Jennifer mentioned all the patients have lots of common experiences. We see that too among our youth and the way they're able to relate to each other. And that really does connect us. And we all want similar outcomes, right? It doesn't matter where we're from. We want the same outcomes as somebody else. we can achieve better health and well-being if we focus on what is important to patients. So true. It doesn't matter if what you're doing, the patient doesn't care about it, you're not helping them, right? Learn from them what's important. And I think, what Amanda said about synergizing and bridging the efforts from the bottom up. So really, taking it from the patient organizations and taking it forward is great. And just having that formal role for patients where they're really a part of the process all the way through. And the urgency of the World Health Organization's recent resolution. And Rebecca looking at integration and co-creation and having it be mutually valued between the parties. If there isn't that mutual value, one side or the other is going to drop out. So you have to have that. And it does take a village. It does take a network. We all have to work together to make it happen. And I think that that's essential, just as health equity is essential. And, knowing that this space, what Clarissa said about patient engagement is dynamic and ever changing. So true. Everything does. And we have to just continue to look forward and see how we can, integrate new things in a quality way, in a way that matters and is important and is done right. And, thinking about AI and things like that, as a technology person, I'm super excited to see how we can really help bring healthcare, really quality healthcare to rural populations that may not have access to it, the experts out there. So I think that's great. I think we have time for just maybe one or two questions, if there are any. Brandy, have you seen any?
I see lots of great resource sharing, which I appreciate, and definitely
Yes.
a sense from our, with so many of the organizations that are participating right now as patient organizations, they have direct access to patients, direct access to many of these conversations. But I think how do we build that bridge to take like these amazing resources that each of you have shared, both in your comments, but also online, and assure that it empowers our patient organizations and in turn the patients that they represent to be effective in this conversation. I think each of you mentioned being in conversations and conferences and relationships with individuals that are making decisions in this space across the healthcare spectrum. And so often patients are mentioned, but are they truly embraced over time?
Yeah.
And does that conversation mature in ways that really yield the results that we're looking for? So, Leanne, I would just invite you to, reach out to your panelists and just maybe get that last word on how do we take this great information as we look to 2025 right on the horizon and say it'll be different by virtue of having had this conversation.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this, Randy, before you were saying it, but because of the last question was kind of what can we expect in the future? I think it's about, the concept of patient engagement is always and who else? And what haven't, who's missing from this conversation? And what is the perspective that I don't have in the room or in the community? And that's our constant challenge to ourselves. I think we have to have the same mentality in our dissemination side, right? So it's always co-authoring, always the patient is the lead presenter of your findings, your project. It's inviting and making sure there is a robust and visible patient community on all your panels at your scientific conference. It's not separate from, it's embedded through, right? Those are the principles we all have to keep cultivating. And the reason I say that is because it's already bearing fruit. So for example, I think the future looks like patient communities themselves are developing their own outcome measures. We're already seeing that happen. Global Skin, the rare disease community, they're not waiting for scientists or academics to define what the instrument ought to be. They're building it themselves. How can we, in our respective spheres, elevate and help validate those tools in real clinical practice? We do that by shining a light on what they're doing and elevating it and talking about it and connecting them with researchers to help them test it out. Their patients are already leading research. whether they're funding it, whether they're talking to VC people and getting the VC people to realize that they're not asking the most important question first, which is, did you include people who are going to benefit from your app, digital health, whatever? And if the answer is no, walk away and give the money to the freaking patient group. And that's already starting to happen.
Yeah.
But I think the more we all talk about that starting to happen and encouraging that to happen, it sets off multiple ripples that don't require us to have the budget to do it. That's free. That's free advertising on LinkedIn. That's bring them to your conference and have them speak. And, it begets the world we want to see.
So true. This
Just
has
gonna
been
build.
really incredible. Incredible commentary. Leanne, I'll let you thank our panelists. I'm so
Yeah.
appreciative. And I think you've sparked more interest in conversations going forward and a validation and alignment that is really powerful. I think each of you said, how great to end this year with this conversation among colleagues and friends on an up note. And I'm really hearing that. So thank you, Leanne, and I'll let you and Spencer kind of take us forward.
Yeah, I do want to thank all of our panelists today for all of the insights you gave. I think you said so many things that were so important that I think really can help change the future of patient engagement as we move forward, if we think about all of these things when we do. And yeah, I think that hopefully next year is brighter than the last, and the year after that is even brighter. So thank you again for being a part of all of this.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. 40 minutes was way too short. We need to, next time make this at least an hour long so we can
Yeah.
get all of your amazing perspectives in there. But again, thank you all so much. Such great key takeaways. There's some resources in the chat, so I encourage everybody to check those out. And we will just move some spotlights now as we move on to our next session, which is going to be with Dr. David Elvira Martinez. Let me pull him up real quick. Thank you, everyone. So David, thank you so much for being here with us today. David is the Global Corporate Public Policy Head at Sanofi. He is currently heading the department that specializes in international health policy topics, defining the company's global position on relevant policy issues and coordinating Sanofi's global policy contributions at the key international trade associations, such as the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations' International Board-Sponsored Committee, the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, as well as PhRMA's, America's Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, their International Senior Executive Committee. That is a tongue twister. But thank you so much for being here, David. And to start us off, can you give us a bit of a brief introduction on what the Sustainable Markets Initiative is and what the Health Task Force is and does?
Perfectly. Thank you. First, thank you for having me today. To answer your question, I will start with two figures. For those that were not in the spring session, climate it's a challenge for humanity with a clear impact on health. And I give these two figures. 250,000 additional deaths per year is the figure that WHO is giving us as the consequences of climate in terms of undernutrition, more malaria, diarrhea, or heat stress of the population. We know, and we are also using the same WHO data, that 3.6 billion people are currently living in areas of the world that are under the risk of the impact of climate, weather events, air pollution, or other climate-related factors. So that was the reason that we started a coalition of willing. This is the SMI, the Sustainable Market Initiative, that basically is a CEO level coalition of several organizations across the healthcare ecosystem. You can find 10 pharmaceutical companies, but we also have representatives from the UN agencies like the World Health Organization, like UNICEF. We have also NGOs that have been working for decades in the climate and health spectrum, like Sustainable Healthcare Coalition. We have also academia. So this is our coalition of willing, that we can say, that started during COP26 4 years ago, and is structured in 4 kind of pillars to address one commitment. That is basically to decarbonize the healthcare systems. Because this is another figure I want to share with you. 4 pillars: supply, patient care pathway, digital healthcare, and consumer health and well-being, to reduce the carbon emissions of our system, healthcare system. The figure I want to share with you: 5%. Healthcare system is responsible for the 5% of the overall carbon emissions, right? Globally. Is that a lot or not? Well, it's more than aeronautics, right? And it's not well known. And at the same time, there is a clear difference with aeronautics. While aeronautics is decreasing the emissions, healthcare system is increasing the emissions. So that was the reason we wanted to work on that. And we know, and this is some of the work that the SMI is doing, we know that 50% of the emissions in the healthcare system is related with the way we supply goods, right? 50%. But the other 50% is related on the way we deliver healthcare, the services, 50%. So this is connected with the way we understand and we build and we deliver the care, so our understanding of the healthcare system. Let me share a couple of more data, figures, just to understand why it's so relevant for us to reshape the healthcare system and the way we are providing health. Basically, with policies like prevention or immunization, we can have the same impact as the reduction, for example, of all the flights Paris, New York in 4 years, right? So the impact, and this is only, for example, immunization of flu in France. So that's why we started to have kind of objectives and deliverables. And let me just share what is the progress that we had this 2024. So in the way we understand patient care, we starting having the way to measure what is the impact, for example, of drugs in carbon emissions. So we have what we call the first framework of the life cycle assessment standards. We also we provided the methodology to measure the impact of the patient care, so the patient journey, in the way we manage diabetes. Why is that important? Because it's a chronic disease, but it's a learning of the methodology that we can apply. And then we can learn that if we avoid the progression of diabetes, we are not only having better outcomes for our patients, we are also having better outcomes for our planet, because we are reducing 50% the carbon emissions. We are also working on the digital healthcare, and precisely this year we have been publishing the first framework to measure the impact of clinical trials and how digital clinical trials can also reduce the carbon emissions. And finally, we have started this year the Consumer and Health or Wellbeing Initiative. That means that for the next year, so we just set the foundation of this initiative, we'll be able to provide evidence about how to design better cities for a better health, for a better sustainability in terms of carbon emissions. I stop here because I'm very conscious of the time, but at least to have any kind of reaction or question from the audience.
Yes, thank you so much, David, for that excellent overview of the work that you guys are doing with the Health Task Force. It's obviously so important to right now as we move forward into new territories, new administration. I will open it up to the audience. If there's anybody who has a question, please use the raise hand function so we can call on you, or feel free to unmute yourselves. I know we're at time here, so thank you all who are still on the call, and thank you, David. I see something right in here from Olivia Casey. They're promoting a survey in English on climate change and the role it plays in impacting autoimmune disease. Excellent.
Yes, exactly. This is another area to also explore. It's the climate, but it's also, for example, is the biodiversity, because this is having a kind of clear impact on in our immune system and potentially in our immune response. So it's not only climate, it's also planet as part of the radar that we are having for the future.
I'm going to put my email in the chat here. If anybody does have a question or comment that they'd like to connect with David or any of our previous panels, please feel free to email me at that, and I can make sure that we get those to them. I'll leave it open for just a minute more, but I do want to respect David's time as well as others on the call. All right. And happy holidays to you as well, Jennifer, and to everybody else on the call. I'll turn it over to Randy now, but first, thank you so much, David, for being here and for the work that you're doing overseas that trickles all around the globe. It's wonderful to see that work coming into fruition. So thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all the panelists. David, thank you for joining us and giving us that update on the great work that's happened over the course of the year since you last spoke to this group. There is so much interest across all of the National Health Council members and really our whole stakeholder community focused on patients to really look at climate and health and all of the impacts that the current situation, presents. I know the Lung Association, Allergy and Asthma Association, Psoriasis Association in the United States, and others are really focused on this issue. So contributing to patient health means contributing to planet health. And the fact that this conversation, so germane to patient engagement, really puts not just the patients at the center as an area of focus, but as clear participants in this space. And how can patients themselves embrace pathways that truly do lead to personal as well as planet health is great. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you to all of the panelists. This has been such a compelling conversation, really motivating and inspiring. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. We'll be hosting another one of these international patient forums in the spring. I'll be looking for your ideas on how we can sustain this conversation in between these fora to really continue to move forward together in a global context to improve patient health, to engage patients, and really influence all of the systems around patients, including business and the ethical practices in that space. Because I think there is a unique moment in time. I've never sensed more readiness to move forward in the patient community and all of those that are involved with the patient community in terms of health. And it's our moment to seize that, whether it's the patient movement catalyst or the outcomes and other measures that we pursue, or the ethical standards that exist now within the consensus framework. We are a community on the move. We're a community of colleagues and friends, and I'm just really thankful to count all of you as partners in this process. So thank you. Have wonderful holidays all, and we will see you in 2025. Take care.